from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we get into all the things that have got you talking today. And politicians are voting as we speak in Westminster pretty much now, or any time now, on the future of COVID restrictions in England. Many of the Tories won't be voting with the Tories, so the government will likely need the opposition to get their plans through. That's a bit awkward, isn't it? And Human Rights Act, essential legislation, but one which many say has been open to way too much abuse. The focus now is on reforming it, and a consultation has opened on the topic. Government wants to, for example, prevent foreign offenders abusing rules around the right to a family life. Critics, however, say it's all mouth and no trousers. Who's right? And while all of us have been distracted with COVID, there's the not-so-small matter Vladimir Putin, who's been busy being Vladimir Putin, quite frankly. Boris Johnson has warned him that there will be serious consequences if he invades Ukraine. Do you think he'll care? We'll have that and more, but first let's look at the latest news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Polly Middlehurst with your latest news headlines. The Health Secretary has announced all 11 countries on the UK's travel red list will be removed from 4 a.m. on Wednesday as Omicron takes hold across the country. Arrivals will still need to take pre-departure tests and a day 2 PCR. Well, MPs are currently debating new COVID restrictions ahead of a vote shortly. Dozens of Conservatives are expected to rebel against the government's Plan B measures, including the wearing of face masks, mandatory vaccines for NHS staff and COVID passports for England. The measures are, though, expected to pass because the Prime Minister has the support of the Labour Party, which backs tighter controls.
But it's the fact that Omicron hospitalisations are low that means it is now the best time to act. And we've seen during previous waves, we've already seen this, the lag between infections and hospitalisations, it's about 2 weeks. When infections are rising so quickly, we're likely to see a substantial rise in hospitalisations before any measure is starting to have an impact.
Meanwhile, in Scotland, the First Minister's advising people to limit socialising to a maximum of 3 households during the Christmas period. Nicola Sturgeon told MSP she's not asking anyone to cancel Christmas, but says they must take Omicron seriously. She also confirmed 2 people are in hospital with the new variant there.
Turning to Christmas Day specifically, or Christmas Eve or Boxing Day, or whenever you have your main family celebration, we are not asking you to cancel or change your plans, and we are not proposing limits on the size of household gatherings. Keeping your celebrations as small as your family circumstances allow is sensible too. Make sure everyone in your gathering is vaccinated and has done a test in advance. Keep rooms ventilated and follow strict hygiene rules.
Meanwhile, there are problems accessing lateral flow tests for a second day running. They're still unavailable via the government website. Double jab people have been asked to take a lateral flow test every day for 7 days if they come into contact with a positive COVID case. The government's appealing for tens of thousands of volunteers to help with the booster jab programme. It's announced a target of nearly 1 million jabs per day to get all eligible adults vaccinated by the end of December. But the former NHS Trust chairman Roy Lilly told GB News that's unrealistic.
To suddenly on Sunday night say, oh, listen, and by the way, on Monday we're going to do 1 million vaccinations. Oh, no, we're not. We've got to recruit the volunteers with the estates people who've got to sort out the locations, there's security, there's clinical waste, there's logistics. I mean, this is a big operation, and I'm not saying the NHS isn't up for it. It is. But if you simply do the numbers, the carryover of the unvaccinated into the next day, it's just statistically impossible to do by the end of the month.
Away from COVID, the Prime Minister has described the murder of 16-month-old Star Hobson in West Yorkshire as shocking and heartbreaking. Boris Johnson also says lessons need to be learned and children must be protected from these barbaric crimes. Savannah Brockhill, pictured on the right, was convicted of murdering the toddler. Her partner and Star's mother, Frankie Smith, seen on the left, has been found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child. Star's great-grandfather says he saw worrying signs of abuse in the family.
My blood used to run cold. I just had a horrible, uneasy feeling about the situation. We even called the car Christine after a horror film in the early 80s. And then Anita used to say, "You do realise little Star's going to finish up a star in the sky." Kept seeing Frankie bruised, and it was just like a domestic relationship.
Now, two of the UK's biggest transport firms are merging after National Express agreed to the takeover of the rival Stagecoach. It'll create a combined worth of around £1.9 billion. Together, they'll have a fleet of around 40,000 vehicles and a workforce of 70,000. That's all the news from me for now. I'm back soon. Let's get back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, I mean, I have to comment on that little death of little Star. It was only a few days ago, wasn't it, that we was all watching this programme commenting on Arthur Labinger Hughes, a little boy. Yet again, we see a little child that's been killed by the partner of their parent. Yet again, we see, don't we, these politicians coming out saying how heartbreaking and saddening it is. I really want to stop hearing those words, and I want to have proper reviews into social services, because how many more children need to die before the failings are taken seriously? Yet another child that was known to the social services. Enough now. And I beg anyone, as I did just a few days ago when we was talking about Arthur, if you are incapable of loving your own child, there are so many options available to you, so many people that will give that child love. And I beg anyone that might be watching this show, if you know of a child that is in harm's way, trust your instinct and do not give in, do not give up, do not be fobbed off by any professional services. If your heart, your gut is telling you a child is in need, then do anything that you can to make sure that they get some help. Anyway, let's move on to tonight's show. Joining me, keeping me company tonight, Kate Hoey, who some of you might recognise, former Labour MP, now life peer in the House of Lords. Roy Freedman, who's a barrister and a political author of Mr. Speaker, Rowdy Living in the Tory party. And Diane Wei-Lang, who's a business professor. Good evening to all of you. And you know the drill on Dewbs & Co by now. It's not just about us and our opinions. What you think matters to me as well. So you can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. If it matters to you, it matters to me, so get in touch and let me know your thoughts. Let's move on, though, to our top story. Anytime soon, the House of Commons will be voting on the government's proposed new COVID restrictions in England, known as Plan B. MPs will be voting on 4 main plans, which are as follows: new rules on mandatory mask wearing, daily testing for COVID contacts to avoid self-isolation, mandatory vaccinations for NHS staff, and to some, anyway, the most controversial one, the COVID certification for venue entry, so-called COVID passports, as they're known. Now, there's been a lot of talk about who's going to vote for this and who's going to vote against this, and it's rumoured that about 80 Conservative MPs are about to rebel and vote against the plans. They're particularly angry, or so it seems anyway, about the passports, the COVID passports proposals. So, I mean, what a strange scenario it leaves us in, because the government look likely then to rely on Labour to pass the legislation. And of course, if it's passed, it'll become law. In an earlier announcement, which some might say is confusing, Health Minister Sajid Javid said that all 11 countries on the coronavirus travel red list will be removed from 4 a.m. on Wednesday. And over in Scotland, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has outlined new guidelines on social contact, which includes asking for no more than 3 households to meet in social settings. Goodness me. I mean, are you keeping up with all this, by the way? If you are you clear on what you're supposed to be doing or not? And just before I go to my panel, by the way, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is outside Westminster, and he'll be bringing us all of the votes and the updates on the votes as they happen. But I want your thoughts on this tonight as well. What do you reckon to all of this Plan B restrictions? Do you think they'll go through? Should they go through? And if you're in Scotland, what do you think to Nicola Sturgeon's latest update? But first, Kate Hoey, I've just mentioned you were a very well-known member of the Labour Party. What do you think to this? I personally find it quite a strange conundrum that the government find themselves in, relying on the opposition to get their plans through.
Well, it's not something that governments like. I was watching quite a bit of the debate today. It's quite interesting not being in there in the middle of it. And of course, just about now, everything will be getting very exciting in the Commons because the wind-up speeches will be happening and people will be beginning to come in to get there for the vote. Clearly, the government have been quite clever in that they've got 4 separate votes. And that means that they will get quite a lot of people supporting the less controversial parts, the bits that are already in place in the rest of the United Kingdom, the mask wearing, which is happening in, for example, Northern Ireland, and also I think there will be some support for the lateral flow test being taken before you go into, say, a nightclub. But for me, the bottom line is really medical privacy. I just think once you start down that line of saying you have to prove that you've had some injection into your body, then that is a slippery slope. So I would be very surprised if there are not even some Labour MPs who will vote against that. And I think Keir Starmer's probably trying to show that he is, showing kind of leadership. I actually think a lot of the public out there will be surprised that the opposition on every aspect of COVID has practically gone along with the government. And the opposition's coming from within the Tory party, and those Tory MPs who vote tonight will find in their own constituencies probably quite a lot of respect for actually voting against their own government, and it won't do the Conservative Party overall any harm. How would you have voted, just briefly, if you was in the House of Commons still? Oh, I would have voted against the idea that you have to have been vaccinated, double vaccination, and now boosters, not even doubles enough. But I'm not against wearing a mask. In fact, frankly, I think when all this business is over, if you're on a London tube, it's actually quite nice wearing a mask because sometimes it's not very nice being so near people. So I'm quite happy about the mask issue. But I think the fundamental issues that the government really does seem to be almost not involving Parliament early enough. And that was a lot of complaints today was that, why has the Prime Minister gone out and made this great State of the Nation speech and then the Leader of the Opposition gets a response, if anyone sort of noticed it. And then... Noticed it? I couldn't help but notice it. I found it incredibly weird, And then, why is Parliament not being asked first? So this is always retrospective and MPs don't like that. No, Bobby, what's your thoughts on all this?
Well, I support Plan B. I hope it passes tonight. I think it's disappointing that...
You support all of it?
Yes, I do. All four, very much so. And frankly, I think, if anything, it's a generous proposal on vaccine passports because it allows people to take a lateral flow test. So it doesn't, in fact, require you to have had a vaccine in order to enter into these venues where people can spread COVID. It's an entirely proportionate measure to this very worrying new variant about which we have very little information at this early stage. Well,
how do you know it's worrying then if you've got little information about it?
Well, precisely because we don't know all of the facts about it. What we do know is that it is spreading extremely quickly. We all hope it is going to be less virulent than Delta, but we don't know that. And the other thing is that even if you have a high risk of reinfection, which all of the indications are that there is, then a small percentage of a very large number still gives you a very big number in terms of people being infected, people being hospitalised and people dying. And we're going to see that. So it's...
You're in favour of these measures then? I think that's the sense I'm getting from you. And I think you must agree as well then that COVID is not really going away anytime soon. So what is your aspiration then? That we just kind of go into this circle every time there's a variant, we just lock down basically, because that's where we're heading, isn't it? Let's be clear. They're not going to stop at mandates and masks and all the rest of it. Would that be your preference?
Well, we're much closer to heading to a lockdown if people don't do what they should do. And this is a funny thing about it. The people who most object to these proportionate and relatively unintrusive measures are the ones who will be most angry if there's a lockdown. So why don't you do the things that will most help, which is get vaccinated and be prepared to show that you've been vaccinated or have a lateral flow test before you go into a venue.
So just before I do move on to Diane, what's your thoughts then? Because some of the countries that have already implemented these measures, so your vaccine passports, your masks, etc., their cases haven't reflected that in terms of a downward trend.
Well, it depends on the point in the cycle. If you're referring presumably to Europe, where they
not just Europe. Look at places like Wales. Look at places like Scotland. You do not see the implementation of passports and masks and all the rest of it linked with a steep decline in cases at all.
But you appreciate it can have an effect on the case rates, and it does. It obviously does.
Not a very good one, no.
Well, it obviously does, because every study shows that if you're vaccinated, you're either at low risk of getting infected, or if you are infected, there was a study from Israel, for example, which showed that you have a lower viral load. So it is obviously the right thing to do for society to encourage people to be vaccinated. We're not talking about mandatory vaccinations. We're talking about ways in which you persuade people to do the thing, which frankly,
coercion.
It's not coercion, it's persuasion. And people who don't get vaccinated are putting themselves at risk, but most importantly, they're putting everybody else at risk. They're clogging up our ICU units, they're stopping people getting cancer treatment, and they are the ones that ultimately make a lockdown more likely.
How are they clogging up ICU?
Because if you get infected with COVID and are seriously ill, and you're much more likely to have that if you haven't been vaccinated, then you are in ICU taking up ICU beds. So unfortunately, it's not just a self-regarding act, it's actually a selfish act that is stopping other people from being treated for their other conditions.
But they pay. I mean, before I just move on to Diane, they pay. The unvaccinated people pay for their NHS treatment, so why shouldn't they get it?
Well, they are entitled to get it, which is why we do treat people in hospital, and I'm not for 1 second suggesting they shouldn't be treated. But the impact of what they're doing, of their decisions, is that it is stopping other people, because if you have a stroke, you need to go into an ICU unit. If you want to have a heart operation, you need to go into an ICU unit. Those are the operations that are being cancelled. They're being cancelled as a result of people who refuse to get vaccinated.
I most certainly don't share your view on a lot of that, but Diane, I'm keen to hear from you before I start again.
Well, I have a question for Kate, but before I go there, I must say, looking at the numbers, if we're following science, 85% of patients in intensive care in Germany for COVID are unvaccinated. 75% in America, patients are unvaccinated. So they do take up, they are significantly...
What's American ICUs got to do with Plan B restrictions here?
What I'm saying is that it's the unvaccinated population that's taking up most of the emergency beds and ICU beds, and that is the case in Europe, that's the case in America.
Diane, we've got the most highly vaccinated population, double vaccinated. Now the booster plan, which I really support if people want to get out there, and we saw the queues in London today. So we are already doing that, and now somehow it seems as if, that is not going to be enough. People are being punished, and the idea somehow that if you're against this kind of erosion on your liberty about being told what you must put into your body, otherwise you will not be able to do things, then I think that is actually almost implying that everyone who feels against that is against vaccination. They're not. I'm being vaccinated. I couldn't wait to be vaccinated, and I don't think there's an adult in this country who over the years hasn't had some vaccination, measles, chickenpox, all the things that we got. COVID, of course, is a fairly, the vaccination is new, and therefore people might be a little bit more concerned, but the whole push of the country should be to get the extra booster, not to try and penalise people by some kind of, stigma almost that's being attached to it.
Research and the cases we've seen in, for example, France, Italy, and America is that when you don't require people to show any kind of proof, it does not persuade people to take up the vaccination. And if we take France as an example, because they require the vaccine passport or the COVID green pass, and for almost every aspect of life.
And you would like
that
here,
they have a much
Diane,
higher vaccination rate. And this is what Austria is doing, making vaccination mandatory, is to drive up the vaccination rate, therefore lower the seriously ill within hospitals. So in a way, it has a purpose.
So are you happy with that? So are you happy that someone, because I do regard it as coercion, I regard saying to somebody, if you don't have your vaccinations, you cannot keep your job. If you don't have your vaccinations, you cannot, you're talking about France, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't do this. I regard that as coercion, and I feel very passionately that any medical intervention or procedure or treatment should be done by informed free choice, not by coercion.
It is in many ways free choice, but if we look at NHS, we look at a lot of the health systems in Europe, and they are very much funded by taxpayers' money, and we say NHS is free. Of course, it's not free. It's paid by everyone. Yeah. So those who are in ICUs, taking up the beds and being treated for COVID, the cost of caring for these just purely cost of the treatment, it's much higher than the contribution they've been making. Taking up a vaccine, it's much, much cheaper. And again, when the ICU beds are overwhelmed, it has a lot of knockdown effects to cancer treatments being cancelled.
See, I don't know. So we all want more people to be vaccinated, Diane. We all do, but it's a question of how you do that. And whether you have to change our whole sort of way of life and the way that we in this country believe very much in individual rights and freedoms to do, to make your own decisions. And I actually think our public are very respectful of what they need to do. But the idea that we should make people do that, I find that very much against my idea of why I think this country, United Kingdom, is such a great country.
But we have to be clear, we're not making people do that. The proposal that's before Parliament, and as I say, I personally would go further, but the proposal that's before Parliament...
How far would you go then?
What would you do? Lock us up?
No, I wouldn't permit lateral flow tests. I would require it that you have to be vaccinated to go into the venues. But the proposal
so
that's
you want
before...
to exclude the unvaccinated, basically from society?
No, I want to persuade the unvaccinated to get vaccinated because that's...
You want to coerce them by saying to them...
I don't want to coerce them, I want to persuade them because that is...
What's the difference between persuasion and coercion?
Well, because the point is if they feel that strongly about it, if they are that misguided that they wish not to be vaccinated, they can do so, but they have to accept the consequences that go with that.
Which is what?
The consequence would be that they wouldn't be permitted to go to venues where they can...
So they can't socialise?
Where they can socialise, they can choose to do so in their own home.
Can they go into a shop?
But they
Hang on,
but they wouldn't be
they
able
can socialise
to,
in their own home, so they can't external... I'm trying to understand your thought process. So in your mind, the unvaccinated can't now, or what you would like to see, they can't socialise outside their own home. What else? No,
I'd love them to socialise outside their own homes by getting vaccinated.
Right, but if they were, so what do you want? They can't socialise outside their own home. What else?
At the moment, with the situation that we're in, I'm not suggesting it forever, but at the moment in the situation that we're in...
The situation that we don't even know how the impact of Omicron.
We've got no evidence about Omicron.
Well, I mean, which only reiterates why we need to be cautious. But what we need to do at the moment is to find a way out of this pandemic. And the trouble, I have to say, where I disagree with your thinking, is that it's idealistic because you don't want vaccine passports, you don't want to try and persuade people to get vaccinated, you don't want to do this, but you don't want any more restrictions, and you want to carry on with a normal life. That's not going to happen because you have to accept that that we have this very dangerous new variant that's spreading incredibly
How do you know it's very dangerous? Because on the one hand, you told me we don't know enough about it. Now you're telling me it's very dangerous. How do you know it's very dangerous?
Because of the rate at which it's spreading.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's dangerous.
No, what we don't know.
Measles.
What we don't know is just how severe it is.
So then why are you calling it a dangerous new variant if you don't know how severe it is?
Because we know this is clearly of some severity and that it will kill people. We don't.
Do we?
Know. Yes, we do. We
do
don't.
We don't. Because how do we know it's going to kill people? Because as far as I know,
because someone's already died with it, so that's a pretty good indication.
800,000 have died in America alone from COVID.
Yeah, but
so
not from this variant.
The virus does kill people.
But
every sensible epidemiologist is suggesting that this, of course, will kill lots of people. The best that we can hope for is that it will kill fewer people as a proportion than Delta does. But as I say, all of the signs are it's going to reinfect a huge number of people. It's spreading incredibly quickly. And a small percentage of a very large number is still a big number. That's why it is a huge risk to people. And we should be trying to protect people. And particularly, if you're right, and I don't for a second believe that you are, but if you're right that it turns out this is all going to be great, it's not going to kill anybody, Well, then we'll know that in about a month's time, and then we can all go back to normal and be happy. But it's not realistic.
At the moment, I think we are very much relying on vaccines because it's the best weapon we have. But given time, hopefully we'll develop cures that will resolve the death issue, the seriously illness, and the ICU beds issue. Then we can look at multifaceted solutions. At the moment,
but we've got treatments.
We do, but we haven't got cures. And for example, if we can...
What's a treatment then?
We have treatments, but it not necessarily will stop people from dying. So once we have developed, and that's where
But people can die from the flu. I mean, we have thousands of people die from the flu.
I mean,
every
surely
year.
we're past this. I mean, the idea
so the idea that somehow we're going to get
she didn't
a
say
cure
that, to be fair
as
to her.
such. I didn't say that actually. You're right. I mean, so I think that's. I think the whole debate around this has been, unfortunately, there's been a kind of almost fear. That's been what's been sort of put through all the time. And, as I say, I'm very supportive of vaccination. I think that a year ago things were very different in this country. Everybody really wanted to comply with the rules, and there was a feeling that they didn't quite know. I think now, a year and a half later, people are feeling different about this. And, they have, even just looking at coming in today, the numbers of people who, aren't wearing their masks properly and so on, because quite honestly, an awful lot of people have accepted that this is going to happen. People are going to get this, but a lot of their friends who've got the new variant have not been very ill. And you're not going to change that attitude by making everything compulsory if you want to socialise and ruin people's lives coming up to Christmas.
Well, there you go. You've heard what my panel thinks. I have to say, Bobby, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, if you had your way, the unvaccinated, they'd only be allowed in their house until they make a decision to get vaccinated. Completely disagree with that view, so I do. However, it's a view, and many of you at home will probably share that view as well, I have to say. Do get in touch with me and let me know your thoughts. Dave says, as much as I like Michelle Dewberry, she's completely wrong on COVID-19, and Bobby is right. Oh. Bill says, I agree with Bobby, but I would go even further. Those that refuse the jab and exercise their right should be refused treatment by the NHS. Bill, your thoughts fascinate me. Where do you draw the line, Bill? Do they get a refund on their national insurance contributions? What about smokers? What about drinkers? What about obese people? What about people that drink drive? What about people that do extreme sports? What about all those people, Bill? Do they not allowed to use the NHS either? I do think some of you agree with me. If you do, get in touch. Am I deluding myself? Get in touch. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. Let me know your thoughts. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be joining Darren McCaffrey. I bet it's freezing cold. He's standing outside Westminster. Don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. I've just got to say, I'm looking down. I've got quite a few devices going on here, and your emails are flying in. They really are, with your responses to Plan B. And I think it's fair to say there's quite a divided view out there. Many of you are absolutely in favour of Plan B, and then some, probably Plan B, C, D, and E and F, if some of you had your way. While some of you, I've got to say, in my view anyway, you're on the same side of the fence, which is my side of the fence, I would like to think, and you're anti them. However, all views are valid. No one makes, who's right and who's wrong in all this. Who knows, is what I would say. Some of these things, it's all quite confusing, isn't it? Anyway, let's go over live now to the House of Commons. MPs, as I mentioned, they are preparing to vote now on the government's Plan B restrictions. Our editor, political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is live there now. Good evening to you, Darren.
Yeah, good evening, Michelle. Stephen Barclay is just wrapping up the debate that's been going on since 1 o'clock today, with MPs on all sides of the House talking about the Plan B restrictions, whether that's the extension of face mask wearing, whether it is rules around isolation, or indeed mandatory vaccines for NHS staff. But more controversially, and the thing that we're likely to see the biggest rebellion on, which is, of course, vaccine passports, bringing England into line with what's happening in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Now, lots of Conservative MPs are not very happy about this. They argue that it is the thin edge, or the thin bit of the wedge, I should say, when it comes to overreach by the government. They feel, and they've said this repeatedly time and time again, they don't think it's terribly effective in terms of driving down case rates or indeed boosting vaccination rates, and they think it's authoritarian and too far. The government, however, looking at the figures tonight, and Chris Whitty's been briefing MPs, and the Prime Minister's been trying to cajole them and charm them in the Commons, are insisting that this variant is really of concern, that we are seeing hundreds of thousands of new daily cases now a day, and that in the end, if it is as contagious as the scientists fear, that we could well see hospitals overwhelmed within weeks. That's what the scientists are saying. It's what the Prime Minister is arguing to his MPs tonight. Not all of them convinced, though it does seem that the rebellion, and there was talk that maybe up to 80 Conservative MPs might rebel tonight, I think they may have chipped a few off the edge. We're not probably expecting it to be that big, but it could still well be the biggest rebellion that Boris Johnson has faced as Prime Minister.
And so in terms of timings, Darren, when do you think we're going to know the outcome of these votes?
Well, so the 4 separate votes in theory, though I suspect maybe on one of them on the mandatory vaccines for NHS staff, that might get nodded through. And so what we'll have, it takes around 10-15 minutes for MPs to vote on each issue. So over the next hour or so, essentially, Michelle, we'll get the results as we go along. So as I say, in about 50 minutes' time, well, when the debate finishes relatively soon, we'll start to get the first results in. The one to look out for is that one on vaccine passports. I suspect it'll be just after 7. That's what we're looking at. And in saying that, MPs today, even during that debate, rather interestingly, there's been a lot of other news swirling around. First of all, at least 8 that we know have tweeted publicly today that they have tested positive. 8 MPs, including Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, and the leader of the Lib Dems, Ed Davey. I think a sign potentially of how much that virus is spreading in that building behind me. And in addition to that, some good news for travellers, and that is that they're going to end the red list hotel quarantine as of 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. So essentially, if you are also already in a hotel, you will be allowed to go free, if you like. The government making the case that in the end, the Omicron variant is now so widespread in the country that having that kind of extra border control will make very, very little difference. So that is coming to an end for those 11 countries as of 4 a.m. tomorrow. The government here, though, not going quite as far, clearly with Plan B, as is what is now happening in Scotland and Wales. Michelle, we heard both today from Nicola Sturgeon and in the last hour from Mark Dreyford, the First Minister of Wales. They are essentially bringing in social distancing measures to things like supermarkets again, and also asking and advising, but not telling or restricting, but asking and advising people in the run-up to Christmas to limit their social interactions to around 3 households at a time. Again, their argument saying that people need to step back a little bit in the run-up to Christmas, though they're not using that advice for Christmas Day itself.
OK, Darren McCaffrey, thank you very much for that insight. Now, I tell you what, I could pick back up with COVID and Plan B with the rest of my panel and literally fill the whole show with it, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and move on to a different topic. The government has said its proposed reforms to the Human Rights Act will be, I quote, common sense, and they'll protect British free speech. The Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab says the reforms will restore confidence in the legal system. Critics, though, say not at all. On the opposite, it will destroy them. The government says that the plans will prevent, for example, foreign offenders abusing the rights around the right to a family life. What do you think to this? Do you think the Human Rights Act needs to change? Would you take your time to actually get involved in this consultation? Bobby, your thoughts?
So I think the consultation is interesting because it doesn't go particularly far. So it's not really as dramatic, I think, as the government's suggesting it is, or some people thought it might be. I think it finesses the human rights. It proposes, anyway, finessing the human rights legislation we have in this country. So it would, in some circumstances, make it harder to bring legal challenges. It proposes introducing a kind of a threshold test that isn't there before. And for example, there are certain categories of offender who would be denied certain rights. So, for example, if you were imprisoned for a very long period of time, you couldn't rely on the right to family life. Overall, though, I think what's interesting about it is really that it is mainly the status quo. It's retaining the fact that we sign up to the European Convention on Human Rights. It is broadly keeping the position as it is, with some tweaks that I imagine will be what the government will focus on.
Kate, the Law Society, which represents solicitors in England and Wales, they're saying that actually this isn't really, these changes, they're not kind of backed up, they're not evidence-based, they're calling them political political rhetoric instead. What's your thoughts?
Well, lawyers love the Human Rights Act because they get lots and lots of money out of it and lots of cases. I think it's quite right. This is not a wholesale abolition of the Human Rights Act, or even a cutting right through it. It's tinkering with it, but in a way that I think the government feel most resonates with people's feeling of fairness. And, I saw that for myself in some of the cases I had of asylum seekers or people who'd been brought in as, who'd not been in the country very long, then actually got found guilty of a criminal offence, something pretty dreadful. And then they should have been deported at the end of their time in prison. And then the lawyers step in and lots and lots of time later, eventually it's ruled after a lot of appeals that the person can't be deported back to their country because of their right to a family life. And also that they can't be deported back if there's a feeling that in the country they're going to be deported back to, they might suffer some kind of, you know. So I think there's a lot of things that people just feel aren't fair about the way it works. So I would like to see the detail. I think the consultation will probably have more, unfortunately, more input from lawyers and from people from all the various, you know, civil rights groups and so on. But I think the average member of the public will actually welcome probably what in the end goes through Parliament on this.
Diane?
Well, I don't know very much about the law of this case. I'd like to ask Bobby whether the courts have that kind of freedom at the moment or flexibility to challenge, for example, a ruling from the European Human Rights Court in Strasbourg, for example. Does that exist already?
So, I mean, I think one of the things the government's proposing, and I should say, I'm not a human rights lawyer, so I'm not an expert on this, in case you think I am. But, you know, from my understanding of it, one of the changes the government wants to bring in is that more regard can be had to the common law that we have here in England, to English cases. At the moment, to be honest, you can have regard to that. So I think that's one of those changes that may move the dial a very small amount, but it's probably more cosmetic than anything else. So I can see why people instinctively might welcome that. And I think in general, it makes sense for courts to be based in the country where they're making decisions, because judges in this country will understand the things that matter in this country and are seated in the public and the way in which we work in this country. So I think that makes sense. But again, I'm not sure that's really going to make that much of a difference in terms of outcomes in court cases.
Mm-hmm. See, Kay, I wonder how much of this is driven by kind of, obviously the Tories were the party that they will say got Brexit done. They were the party that had the oven-ready deal around Brexit. And I wonder how much the Brexit sentiment plays a part in this in terms of people's appetite for change, and how much of that, I guess to quote the Law Society, it is that kind of rhetoric and ticking boxes for people's emotions rather than a real need for change.
Well, I know that most people think that the only thing in the manifesto of the last government was, you know, to get Brexit done, but actually to look at the Human Rights Act was part of the manifesto. Because,
was it?
Oh yes, it was in the manifesto. I'm not quite sure of the exact wording, but it certainly talked about looking at the Human Rights Act, because there has been concern for some time at the abuses we've mentioned, or I've mentioned, on that. But I think people do feel that they want to know that decisions in their own country are taken by their own courts and by their own government, rather than, as we did have under European Union, and don't have that now, and we can't make the excuse of the European Union for things going wrong anymore, which is one of the reasons I remember saying when we were going through the referendum that, you know, in the end, our civil service, our government is going to have to say, well, look, we're not looking to Brussels to see what we have to do. We make our own decisions as an independent country. So I think it's quite natural that we look at a lot of things now over the next period of, you know, the future after we've left the European Union. Things are going to be different, and we have a choice of how that will work. But people, you know, the public do need to, you know, take an interest in this, because otherwise it will be left to the special interest groups, and I'm afraid they sometimes are out of touch with what, you know, the average person out on the Clapham omnibus, as they say.
Yeah, what they think and feel. OK, well, do get in touch and let me know your thoughts on that. You're still, I have to say, I am getting inundated with emails, tweets. They are literally flying in, and you're all still kind of really energised about the whole Plan B thing. If I've got any of those results, I will get in touch. But again, people are very divided. That's what you're all emailing me about. Kenneth has been in touch and said, Michelle, for the first time ever, I do not agree with you. That's all right, Kenneth. This is the beauty of what should be an open and free society. We should be able to have differences of opinions. The society that I'm desperately keen to avoid, by the way, is one where actually these kind of conversations are not happening, where choices are not taking place. That is what I am desperate to avoid. I don't care what the reason is for it. I think the moment you start kind of tiptoeing in terms of that territory, it's a very, very worrying time. Jay says on the email, I used to love lockdown. Made a lot of sense to me. But I don't think it makes sense anymore. Ken says, well, quite frankly, I'll do what I want to do, and I will not be dictated by anyone what I can and can't do. Carl says, well, Labour will be remembered in history as a lily-livered party who didn't stand up for human rights and freedoms. Carol from Doncaster, she says, like Doncaster, says, how can restrictions on the 11 countries on the red travel list be lifted, but yet extra restrictions be forced upon us? There you go. Keep your views coming in. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking about Vladimir Putin. What on earth has he been up to? And should we be worried about it? Don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. I can tell you, we in this studio, we're filling the breaks with the conversations about Plan B, what they should do and what shouldn't be happening. I can tell you, it's quite spicy debate in the studio. Anyway, we've got 4 votes happening, as we've already mentioned to you.
Yeah.
The first one is through now, mandatory masks.
Yeah,
that's in a variety of places now, isn't it? Extending it beyond where it was. So yes, 441, no 41. Majority is yes to that. So we've got the second one coming in now. Let's have a listen if we can. So Kate Herwey, you're next to me. Just talk my viewers through what they are seeing here.
Well, you're seeing people deciding which way they're going into the lobbies. If to the speaker's right is aye is to the right, to the left is no's to the left. So there are 2 entrances, and actually with COVID now, they're only going in one, I think. So you're seeing them going in at one side
Just
here.
explain to my viewers, because some of them might not be familiar. So when you're talking about different lobbies and aye to the yes, so people are voting by actually walking through corridors. Just explain it to my viewers.
Well, they're still doing that. During the worst of the COVID lockdown, so on, when Parliament was being done by Zoom, a lot of people, they didn't have to, they walked through in a different way, but now they're back to more or less normal in that they go into one side or the other, and then they queue up and put their name, tick their name off. Mm-hmm. In the House of Lords, we're still doing it by our phone, that you can vote on your phone, but you have to be in the premises. You can't sort of go off and be in a restaurant and be voting. So that's something that the Lords are still doing differently. So this must be the second vote now that they're finishing off.
Yeah, and keen political observers or people that are keen to observe things like these restrictions might remember there was an instance in Wales, I think it was, the voting there, where there was one of the Tory MPs, that wanted to vote against the restrictions and wasn't able to kind of get connected, however you want to describe it. I think there's some kind of contradiction there about what happened, but that actually passed, those measures passed, and that one vote could have made a real difference.
But you'll see people, it's a time when MPs talk to each other, from different parties as well. I'm not surprised that mask one went through by such a big majority, because that really isn't, particularly controversial at all. And
I would have voted for that. You might know more about it than me, Kate, I have to say. Did I hear somewhere that this won't apply to the masks, the mandatory masks, for example, wouldn't apply to the parliamentary estate or to the chamber itself?
Well, they are regulated by, the Speaker's own decisions, and at the moment we're all wearing masks in the chamber. In the House of Lords, particularly. In the Commons, I think they have gone back.
Or is that
you have to, yes. I mean, if someone takes a mask off briefly, they're not going to be marched out of the House of Lords, but there is a general feeling that when you're sitting in that space that you keep your mask on, and when you're walking around inside the Commons or inside the parliamentary estate, there is a ruling that you should wear your mask. So, but we are always governed slightly differently from those, from the normal rules outside Parliament. But on the whole, we keep to what the government rules are.
Right, OK. I'm going to move on to a different topic, just so you know, because we haven't got the other votes coming through yet. There's another 3 votes, which is around daily lateral flow testing. This is about avoiding self-isolation. And then you've got the mandatory vaccine for the NHS staff. And then, of course, the one that we've just been debating is the introduction of vaccine passports. So if we do get results for those on the last few minutes I've been on there, I'll let you know. But I will move on. I don't have much time left for this now. Got to say, we've been distracted by COVID. And one person who must be absolutely delighted by the fact that many people are so distracted by COVID is, of course, the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's been told by Boris Johnson that there will be, I quote, significant consequences if Russia invades Ukraine. That was in a telephone call this week. Mr. Johnson was reinforcing the UK's commitment to Ukraine. His call was the latest intervention by Western leaders who are attempting to dissuade, I would say, the Kremlin. They want them to kind of pull back from the borders. There's a lot of concern about the build-up of Russian troops in the region. This isn't the first time it's happened, by the way. It happened before, earlier this year. We don't have a lot of time to get into this, unfortunately. But Diane, your thoughts on it?
Well, to me, what is the motivation for Putin to put the troops there in the first place? Is this his plan to actually invade Ukraine, or this is a political power play because there are so many issues at stake? There's the Nord Stream 2, which is the pipeline going through Europe that has been blocked so far by Germany. And there's also the influence of NATO in Europe that Putin would like that to be contained. And there's also the relationship between Russia and US. And to me, it's what is the motivation? Is this really leading up to war, or they just song and dance?
Song and dance, do you think? See, what I found interesting is earlier this year, Putin was saying that he regards Russia and Ukraine as one people and a single whole. But that's not. Many in Ukraine would say that's absolutely not the case. And what I find interesting about this, Bobby, is a lot of it centres around NATO, whether or not Ukraine should be able to, and I say should be able to, I'm not really quite sure what it's got to do with Vladimir Putin anyway, but whether or not they should be able to join NATO. And that's kind of quite central to a lot of this.
Well, I think the problem with Ukraine joining NATO is that NATO is a defence pact. So if Ukraine were invaded, as I think actually is increasingly likely, then we and other countries in NATO would be required to respond. And there's just no appetite for that. For me, it goes back to Afghanistan. When the US withdrew from Afghanistan, that was signalling to the world that the US was not going to get its hands dirty anymore to protect human rights around the world. And Vladimir Putin looks at that, and he knows he can invade Ukraine, just as he annexed Crimea before. And we might impose some kind of sanctions or we'll expel a few diplomats. We're not going to actually take any military action. We're not going to stop him. So he has a blank check to do whatever he wants.
Do you think he would actually invade Ukraine?
Yes, I do, because as Michelle was saying before, the way he looks at it, he views it as effectively Russian. So I think, I'm not saying it definitely will happen, but I think there's a very substantial chance of
But you
this.
see, Kate, I don't think, not that I am some military foreign expert, so of course I do caveat my perspective on that, but I actually think the point Diane made was a real key one, which is the Russian, the pipe trying to get the gas over to Europe. And he's not going to want the EU to start blocking all that stuff, is he? Very briefly, your thoughts, like super quick.
I mean, I'd probably be proved completely wrong, but I actually don't think there will be, certainly in the near future, any kind of actual invasion. But I do feel that what he is trying to do is to get NATO to back off on the question of Ukraine joining. And they've already suggested that it might be some time, 2 or 3 years. So I think that's one of the things that he will play. But I think that he will keep pushing as, he's got a very weak president in Biden. And I think he knows that too.
I wonder what Vladimir Putin makes to all this when he gets these calls from Boris Johnson warning of like serious consequences. Do you think that he sits there and goes, "Ooh, best get away from Ukraine," or do you think he couldn't care less? Anyway, let's go back to Darren McCaffrey and find out the latest in Westminster. Darren McCaffrey, good evening to you. What's going on?
Yeah, so we've had 2 votes, essentially, or a vote and a bit, I should say, in the House of Commons. First of all, on the extension of face masks to more settings like shops, concert halls, polling stations, museums. It's 441 votes to 41. So it looks like, to a large degree, in the end, the government have won that, obviously, comprehensively. Maybe a Tory rebellion around the mid-30s. As Kate Hoey, I think, was saying earlier on, not the most controversial of all the issues, but they have backed that. The other one they have backed with a nod, so it didn't go to an actual vote, was on the changes to the isolation rules when it comes to telling people, essentially, to isolate if they've come into contact with someone, if they've tested positive for this virus, even if they're vaccinated. They're now on to the third vote, Michelle, and that is the most controversial of all, of course, the vaccine passports. Again, it'll be fascinating to see just how big that rebellion is. I suspect we'll get a result in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
Well, thanks for that update. Someone on Twitter called Straight Talker just got in touch with me saying, I'm sure that Putin is shaking in his boots, especially after he's seen all the panic the government in this country has gone into over the virus. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on all of that. But unfortunately for tonight, that is all we've got time for. We'll be back the same time tomorrow, 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock. But for now, thank you very much to my panel. And thank you, of course, to you at home for your company tonight. Have a good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow night.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there, welcome to the latest forecast. There'll be a lot of cloud during the next 24 hours, shrouding the hills of the western UK and keeping things mild. There'll be some rain as well, but that will tend to ease later as this area of high pressure moves in for the rest of the week and begins to properly settle things down widely. Before that happens, these weather fronts and these tightly packed isobars across northern parts of the UK bring wind and rain for Tuesday evening. Some heavier rain at times for the northwest Highlands, but through the night, the area of cloud and rain across Scotland sinks south. It clears from the far north and northwest, but it edges into Northern Ireland, parts of northern England as well. It stays cloudy across southern areas, but through this slice of central UK, clearer spells and perhaps a few pockets of fog first thing. A chilly start here as well, and once the fog clears, plenty of sunshine emerging across parts of North and East Wales, the Midlands, eastern England. Also turning brighter to the north of the Central Belt, some decent sunshine here and less windy compared to Tuesday. Otherwise, a lot of cloud cover, some light outbreaks of rain and drizzle, more persistent damp weather for parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and northwest England. And this area of cloud and outbreaks of rain starts to move north once again on Wednesday evening, pushing into the rest of Scotland eventually overnight. Meanwhile, it stays mostly cloudy across Wales, southern and southwest England. But for the Midlands, eastern England, southern Scotland, clear spells, which will lead to, in some places, frost and even fog to begin things on Thursday. Once any fog clears, though, the best of any sunny spells will be across eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, northern and eastern England. Generally cloudy skies elsewhere. The rain in the far north of Scotland eases through the day so that by the afternoon actually many places are dry, but it will turn a bit colder. High pressure is extending across